Okay, if I could ask everyone to please take their seats. We're going to get our second panel going in just a moment. But before I do, a public service announcement. As you just heard, the changes that have rocked the Middle East in recent years have been remarkable. At the same time, record-setting arms sales are also sweeping the Middle East and North Africa. 3 years ago, a sharp young Hill staffer came to us and urged us to find a way to help him and others understand these challenges. The result was this new website, militaryedge.org. The goal of militaryedge.org was to provide a dynamic and up-to-date resource on the military balance in this hotly contested and ever-changing region. MilitaryEdge.org took more than a year to first compile. It still requires hours of updates each week as new equipment enters the region. All of this hard work is done by Patrick Megahan, our website manager and analyst. Patrick, say hello. Here you go. Today, the site tracks the arsenals of 25 countries and non-state actors in the Middle East and North Africa. We expect to expand and follow more actors as developments change in the region. While the balance can be complex at times, we build a number of features into the website to make the data more digestible. For example, we have a compare function so users can make side-by-side comparisons of adversaries or even opposing coalitions. Users can compare the number of aircraft, armored vehicles, or warships. More details available if a user wants to compare the number of Israeli F-15s to Iranian MiG-29s, for example. And to convey quality assessments, we have created a rather simple color-coded rating system. For the real wonks out there, you can take a deeper dive into the various armaments in the region. MilitaryEdge.org provides technical data on over 1,000 different weapons systems. That's everything from Israeli tactical UAVs to Egypt's new Mistral-class amphibious assault ships. We track the news related to each armament from its purchase to delivery timeline and when it might be ready for combat. The site also features other defense-related news, allowing users to follow nearly every aspect of the military balance in the region. This includes the latest arms deals, legislation on Israel's qualitative military edge, military exercises and deployments, and of course, the daily clashes that make news in a very volatile Middle East. Finally, the website hosts unique content and analysis from FDD experts. It's all linked together with all the tools that I just mentioned. The goal is simply to help decision makers and analysts gain a better understanding of the complex interplay between weapons, war, and politics in the Middle East. Now that you've got a sense of the site's capabilities, we hope you'll take it out for a test drive. Constant upgrades and additions are being made, and the site will soon expand beyond the Middle East to include North Korea. Please check back for other changes, and as always, we welcome your feedback. Thank you, and on to the next panel.
Good morning, everyone. No. Hello. Hello. There we go. Good morning, everyone. I'm Marcus Weisgerber. I'm the Global Business Editor over at Defense One. Another website for you. I write about arms sales, and I've traveled extensively to the Middle East and gone to a lot of arms shows and covered Israel's QME, which is going to be the discussion among this panel here today. We'll go really quick with intros for everyone. We have Mary Beth Long, who's next to me, who is the Assistant Secretary of Defense for International Security Affairs and is currently a non-resident senior fellow here at FDD. Thank you for joining us. Derek Chalet, who is the Assistant Secretary of Assistant Secretary of Defense for International Security Affairs as well, and is currently Counselor and Senior Advisor for Defense Policy at the German Marshall Fund. Andrew Shapiro, who I actually just realized last ran into in the Middle East in Abu Dhabi at a big arms show, who is Assistant Secretary of State for Political and Military Affairs from 2009 to 2013 and Managing Director now at the Beacon Global Strategies. And Jonathan, who just introduced us to that great website, which is looks to be a great tool, and I look forward to actually using that in the future.
Do.
So I guess we'll just start off talking, I guess, a little bit about the Iran deal and how that could and might shape or change Israel's QME. So I guess maybe start with Derek and tackle that subject.
Well, first, thanks everyone for coming out this morning, and congratulations on this new website. I look forward to checking it out and using it. I just based on first glance, I can pretty much guarantee it's better than anything our intelligence community ever produced on the military balance in the Middle East. It's probably more accurate. So anyway, congratulations to you. It's a real service for those of us who care about this region and who care about QME. It's something that I'll look forward to using in the years ahead. Clearly, the Iran deal has temporarily changed the strategic picture in the Middle East, I believe, for the better. However, it does not lessen the importance of maintaining Israel's QME. In fact, it increases it. Because commensurate with the Iran deal, as you all have seen over the last several years since the JCPOA was signed, the United States has embarked on an effort to ensure that our Gulf partners are reassured, have the military capability that they need to defend themselves from Iran, and to help us as active partners, whether it's in fighting ISIS or dealing with Iran. And that, of course, creates anxieties in Israel, as it should, because as our Israeli friends will often remind us that, and reminded me when I was served in government, and I'm sure Mary Beth heard the same thing, which is we understand your partnership with the Gulf states, we understand your military cooperation, and we understand that for the moment at least, those countries are partnering with you. But we also worry about if things were to change in that region. We've seen over the last 5 years how quickly things can change in the region for the worse. And therefore, our Israeli friends need to be reassured that they have the military capabilities that they need to defend themselves by themselves. So I would argue that because of our strategic move here to ensure that our Gulf partners maintain the military capabilities that they are asking for, it's incumbent upon us, and it's also the law, to maintain Israel's QME.
Jonathan.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you, by the way, for all being here and for you for moderating. Look, I would argue that Derek is right to be concerned about this question of arms sales out of the Gulf. I think that goes without saying. We're seeing aircraft and cruise missiles, advanced weaponry that the Gulfies are buying. Right now, things seem to be okay between the Israelis and our Gulf partners. But there is obviously concern about the long-term prospects of this, the sort of idea that the Saudis and the Israelis are going to be celebrating Rosh Hashanah together is, I think, not terribly likely. But I think actually there's some broader issues that I'd want to raise about the Iran deal. Part of the deal that I think is very disconcerting is the fact that in 5 years the arms embargo against Iran will be lifted. And we don't know what that will do to QME in 5 years. The same goes for the ballistic missile ban that will end in 8 years. That's going to change the military balance of power yet again. More immediately, we have the problem of the $100 billion. Of course, the administration says it's 50 after they do some accounting in terms of what Iran may owe in debts. I'm not sure that that is a correct assessment. I think we'll have to wait and see. But regardless, even if it's 50 billion, you have the real potential for Iran to be able to support non-state actors as well as state actors, including Hezbollah. And Hezbollah's rocket arsenal has gone from roughly 50,000 to 150,000 over the last 10 years. That is a significant jump and something that has caused the Israelis some significant concern. And then, not to mention the Assad regime, if it survives, what that will have in its arsenal. And then there's the sort of broader question of what happens at the end of this deal. In 12 to 15 years, Iran will have a full-sized industrial nuclear program that will no longer be under sanctions. Now, of course, the goal was to ensure that Iran wouldn't make a dash for the nuke, but that doesn't mean that we can necessarily prevent it. No one knows what's going to happen down the line. And of course, during that time, you have I guess one last additional concern is that the Arab states may experience what the Israelis have been calling a nuclear cascade, that the Egyptians, the Turks, the Saudis, everyone and their grandmother is going to want to get a nuke because they're afraid that Iran is getting closer and closer. So when one looks at the broader scheme of things from the Iran deal, there are a lot of complications, I think, that the Israelis are struggling with, and certainly here in the United States, as the discussion continues about QME, I can just imagine that it's not been terribly fun.
Right now, the U.S. is negotiating a new arms deal with Israel. It's been coming any day now for a while. How does, coming off the Iran deal, how does this package differ from previous deals with Israel for arms? So basically, what is in it that kind of maybe reassures them some more?
Well, I think Israel is asking for more quantity. Am I on?
I think so.
Okay, as well as qualitative, superior technology, things along the lines of Joint Strike Fighter, more advanced systems to put on their current. I think we're all very well aware of the deal that was struck as a result of the latest package. I think that Andrew and colleagues pushed through. I think as far as the technical details of what they've asked for, I don't think those are public yet, so I'll leave them. My concern is that none of those will protect Israel from where we are with Iran, and that QME has become both a sacred cow and a red herring for a discussion that we ought to be having, which is that as a result of the nuclear deal today, QME doesn't measure the significant advancement of the Quds Force and the Republican Guard and Iranian proxies that today and for the next 5 years not only will serve and are serving as a significant threat to Israel and Israeli allies. And while we have this sacred cow of QME that we wrap around ourselves as having been, our duty to have protected Israel, what we've really done is left her and the Gulf allies out to dry on Iranian aggressive activities in support of terrorism and in support of their own hegemonic aspirations. So that's number one. So in the broader sense, we've failed on QME. On the specific sense, QME has become a sacred cow in that we aren't paying attention to the purposes of it, I think, as much as we should. For example, by allowing the Iranians to get away with missiles and advanced missile testing that is currently going on, and then the 5-year expiration of what I think everybody thinks is a tenuous program in which they're supposedly not developing a nuclear weapon, there will be no advanced weaponry that we can sell Israel and no technology that we can provide her that is going to protect her from an Iranian either threshold program or a nuclear weapon. It's just not possible. So we've sort of lost our eye on the goal, which is to protect her ultimately. Secondly, we are driving a wedge between Israel and the Gulf states by focusing on individual pieces of equipment. Is the helmet-mounted cueing system, is the AIM-9X, is the JDAM going to enhance or somehow diminish Israel's QME in this purchase or even the purchase that finally went through in 2009 that had been brewing since 2007? What we've given is a tremendous leverage to the Israelis to not only ask for more things, more money, more technology, more numbers, in parallel to a veto of what the Gulf states have, which alienates Israel and the Gulf states on a very important subject, which is what can we do today and tomorrow against Iran, and left our industrial complex behind, because while we don't sell F-15 or F-15Es to either the Saudis or the Qataris, other people will, or the equivalent. Or while we don't sell or give a path to Joint Strike Fighter, even perhaps a lower common denominator or an export version to the Gulfies, other people will. So we're giving up the ability to shape and influence key quasi-allies, maybe even tactical allies, but certainly regional players with whom Israel has to have some kind of relationship, even if it's adversarial. Better that we're their weapons supplier than someone else if it ends up being that way. And what we've done is hide our hands in doing that by basically sanctifying this process that no one can really articulate. It's more of a science. And we're going to also have diminished ability to sell to actual buyers real equipment, which will enforce Chinese and other weapons suppliers to sell to countries that we should have some ability to shape. And I think it's it's no longer strategic, and we need to take a real hard look.
Andrew, as the guy who is approving arms sales, how do you strike that balance when, for instance, we brought up the F-15s. Qatar wants F-15s because of Iran. Kuwait, this Super Hornet deal has been, again, one of those deals that's been apparently awaiting the final stamp for months and months now. You have defense companies here saying, but Boeing specifically in this case, who's going to be very soon out of the building fighter jets because the production for the U.S. is essentially completely drying up. So a lot of jobs there. How do you strike the balance between approving a deal like that and also making sure Israel's happy?
Right. Well, I think just to echo something that Derek said, which is at this point, QME analysis is especially challenging because the region is changing before our eyes. And how do you make predictions when things are so fluid on the ground? And it is very challenging. In the U.S. government, the bureau that I headed, the Bureau of Political Military Affairs, was the bureau which made the assessment on QME. It's actually vested with the Secretary of State, not the Secretary of Defense, to make these decisions. And why is that? It's because ultimately you need to have a broad perspective with technical expertise to make these types of decisions, to be able to make these types of strategic decisions. And under the law and policy, the decision was made that Secretary of State and designated the Bureau of Political Military Affairs are able to take those into account, the broad policy objectives as well as the technical aspects of it when you make these decisions. So it's very challenging. You know, when I was in government, we had the Arab Spring, we had an Egyptian government turned into a Muslim Brotherhood government. Then it switched back. And we would talk to Israelis who would say, for the first time since Camp David, we have to really worry about our southern border, what that's going to be like. And they were shifting their own plans. And now the government has changed again, and now they're shifting again. Now they're concerned about keeping the border with Syria secure. What happens if Hezbollah comes back into Lebanon? We talked about the Iranian threat. So it's particularly challenging. But at the end of the day, the U.S. policy is in the region is an attempt to bolster our partners, to hedge against an Iran that while the hope is that over time Iran will change its way it's approached the region. The Iran deal was not premised on that. The idea is that we will hedge against if they make those bad decisions by giving our partners what they need. And so there's been a real effort to provide our partners what they need, but at the same time, making sure we're complying with our obligations under QME. And some of the sales that you referenced are going through that process right now. How do we give them what they need at the same time while ensuring that Israel's QME is preserved? And part of this is also tied up into the renegotiation of the FMF deal, which is how are we going to make sure in this 10-year extension for those who don't follow this as closely as us, the Bush administration signed an agreement when Mary Beth was in, a 10-year agreement for FMF at about $3 billion a year that's expiring in 2017. And so there's negotiations going on to extend that agreement for another 10 years. And the Israelis, given what's going on in the region, they want more. And we are negotiating how much more to give them. And at the end of the day, it comes out of the State Department budget, the FMF account, Foreign Military Financing account, which is a limited account, and Congress only gives so much money for that account. And so the administration has to balance, the more we give to Israel, the less there is for everybody else. And so we're trying to figure out what the right balance between giving Israel what they need versus not decimating the rest of the FMF account. And so these are ongoing discussions and negotiations. And when Derek and I were in government together, we would have these conversations on a regular basis with our Israeli partners, with our Gulf partners. And they often come down, there is a technical aspect to it, what these systems do, but there's also a broader strategic aspect. What do we think the region is going to look like in the next 5 to 10 years? And we would often have conversations with the Israelis on that as well. How do we compare notes about what the region is going to look like so that we can make the best assessment that we can?
What happens after the FMF deal? What do we see? Do we see Do we see the GCC states looking elsewhere, or just as a kind of a sending a message like, okay, we'll go buy something from Russia, or we'll go buy something from Europe instead of the U.S.? Do we see something like that happening?
Well,
in what ways?
Can I just piggyback?
Sure.
Respond to something both Andrew and Mary Beth said. I think, first of all, to be clear, the administration wants to get the FMF deal done with Israel, the new MOU, and it's willing to give Israel more money. The debate now, as I understand it, and none of us are in government, is over how much more. And is it going to be 70% of the FMF budget, or is it going to be 60% of the FMF budget? It's still going to be a lot, right? And as we've seen over the last several days within Israel, there is a debate about whether Israel should take the deal on the table or not. I think the finance minister in the last 24 hours has said that the prime minister should take the deal, right? I think the IDF wants the deal because they know it's going to be more money for them, and it's certainty for the next 11 years, so they can do planning and procurement. And also, I'm thinking back to 2013 when I was still in government. The administration made a decision to, and came to agreement with the Israelis to provide the Israelis with some very key pieces of capability, V-22s, and they would have been the first country to get the Osprey refueling tankers that they couldn't afford. I mean, we cut the deal, we were ready to give it to them, we had worked with industry and the services to have that stuff ready to go, but at the end of the day, the Israeli budget could not support them acquiring that capability. Now, that was not a QME specific negotiation, but those are capabilities we are not talking to any of our Gulf partners about. As Andrew mentioned, there are certain big deals in the pipeline. There's been, first of all, a lot of Gulf capability, a lot of capabilities gone to the Gulf in the last year. I think it was $33 billion worth of sales went through the State Department since May of last year. But one of the things we do press up against, and this is what I want to echo something Mary Beth said, is we have QME, and we believe in QME, not just because it's a law that's imposed on us, it's because we think it's the right thing for the region, and it's the right thing for an important partner of ours, Israel. And other countries in the world don't have QME. And it's not just China and Russia, it's also our friends like France and the UK, friends who compete with us in the region for sales. One of the kind of windmills I like to tilt at is thinking through, if we're thinking through this is a 5 to 15-year project using the time frame of the JCPOA as the window here. We need to engage in a conversation with our European friends about how they're engaging in the region and try to make them more mindful of QME. I mean, ideally, they would also adhere to QME. I think given the tricky politics right now between Europe and Israel on a lot of other issues, that's not in the offing anytime soon, but I think it's something that the United States should be having very frank conversations with our British and French counterparts about the way that they're behaving in the region and the types of ambitions they have for their arms sales.
I totally agree with everything that my colleagues have said. The process that Andrew told you about, that process has been going on for decades, and the proof is it works. What I see, though, is two fundamental changes in the region. But some of those changes in the region, frankly, were facilitated by U.S. Promotion of this Iran deal and the perception, and I think reality, that we withdrew from the region in important ways, which sent our Gulf partners, these big billions of dollars of deals that you see going through the Gulf countries of advanced weaponry. These things have been in the pipeline for years. Some of this equipment they've been asking for, they'll go back and tell you decades for the Patriot and the Patriot upgrade. That's at least an 8-9 year endeavor. I know we had a lot of this stuff has been going through the system for a very, very long time, in part because of QME analysis or early objections by the Israeli to these going to Gulf partners. But what you don't see, and this is where I know I'll get myself in trouble, and all of you who know me will not be surprised by that fact, that in addition to this disconnect between QME strategically and where we've left Israel vulnerable to Iran and its proxy forces, et cetera, I also see what I believe to be some important questions we're not asking about our Israeli friends and the use of this process and this FMF. And QME, and that is billions of dollars that go to the Israelis. Andrew is exactly right. since decades, we give Israel billions and billions and billions of dollars in order to enhance her ability to buy U.S. defense equipment. In parallel, we also give her money to do things like supplement Iron Dome, which this administration did, which was a great move. We also give her discounted equipment on her military. And if you look at the per capita distribution of the funds that go to Israel, as far as her defense is concerned, it's substantial. I think most American taxpayers would be surprised, particularly when you compare that to the significant development of the Israeli defense industry over the same period, and the fact that they are exporting at a very rapid rate, including exporting to countries that we can't export to for various other moral and defense reasons. Right now, Israel is the largest defense equipment provider to the Indians, for example. So there's the question about how much of that is U.S. technology, or how much of the really big defense decisions is Israel making. If you don't have enough money to pay for your F-22s, for example, how are you organizing your billions of dollar defense budget? What are you prioritizing over that? And shouldn't we have visibility on that since we're the bill payer? Number one. And number two, where is all this money going that you're getting from your exports of your defense equipment to other buyers in the town, including to Gulf Arab allies of things like UAVs? Where's that money going? And why can't that be supplementing what Iron Dome, which you're asking me to supplement? So the other big disconnect is, how is all of this tied into the bigger picture of who's supplying weapons to whom, and how is Israel prioritizing her defense budget, particularly to the extent it causes a loss of sale to a U.S. company and U.S. jobs?
So I'm going to turn to the audience in just a minute for Q&A, but I want to turn to a political question that we had submitted in advance, and it says, do you anticipate either presumptive presidential nominee would be more or less committed to Israel's QME?
I'll take that too.
Yeah. I guess.
How about we go right down the line? John, at the end.
Look, one thing I just want to say before I respond to that is to Mary Beth's point. I think one needs to take into account how much of the money that's invested in Israel's military equipment that's provided by the United States is made here in the U.S. and actually supports American business, supports American industry. That's more than 3/4 of the funds that have been made available. And so I think when you look at that calculus, it cannot be overlooked. There is a real boost to American industry as a result of the MOU. As for the political calculations moving forward, look, this is the real risk that I think Benjamin Netanyahu is taking, that he is stringing this along and betting on perhaps getting a better deal, a better MOU, more money that's invested back into the Israeli defense industry. These are the two sticking points. It's not just the amount of money, but how much would go back into Israel proper. And it's unclear, I think, now in Israel that Bibi will get a better deal. And so you're seeing that his defense minister is pushing back after his most recent meetings here in Washington and telling him, go take this deal right now. Moshe Kahlon, another member of his coalition, is also pushing him to go do this. There is a real sense, I think, among the military community there that the hard work is done, that the understanding of Israel's QME is, I think, they're in concert on a professional level. So it's unclear to me exactly what Netanyahu is pushing for, but it seems like there's a growing chorus in Israel that he's not going to get anything better under a Trump or a Clinton administration, that it's going to be basically the same. Why not lock it down now so that Israel can begin to plan for the future?
On this, first of all, obviously I worked for Secretary Clinton handling this brief, and I worked for her for 8 years in the Senate. And no question that she is fully committed to Israel's QME. On the campaign trail, she's talked about how she would continue to support Israel's security needs, and indeed would want to have discussions soon after taking office with Israel about how to best support security needs. I would say, though, that when you talk about better or worse, the Obama administration on this issue has been as strong as any administration. I gave a speech at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy near the end of my tenure where I laid out all the things that the Obama administration has done, and quoting Israeli officials that said on security issues, putting aside, the disagreements on the Iran agreement or on the peace process, but on security issues, this administration had been the best administration that they had worked with. And so I think, it's not a matter of better or worse. I think Secretary Clinton would continue the very strong efforts of the Obama administration on supporting Israel's security going forward. There would be, on the FMF deal, I think it would just be a continuation of the conversation that's going on now.
I'll just echo what Andrew said, but I think it is a matter of better or worse. It's a clear case. I mean, Secretary Clinton understands QME. She understands the relationship with Israel. She said that she would invite the Prime Minister here in the first several months of office if she were president. Donald Trump, I think all bets are off. I mean, he's a businessman. He would say QME, why? That's holding up us from selling stuff to people, and the Israelis are playing this bargain with us where they're trying to get more money for themselves. Like, no, I don't play that. I mean, it seems to me no one can honestly say that it would be better for QME if we would have a Trump presidency. And I think if you're the Prime Minister of Israel, I mean, I think what the administration is telling him, and what I would say to my Israeli friends is take the MOU deal you've got. It's a good deal. It's better than what you previously had, and it's something that will lock in for the future guaranteed support from the United States.
I can't begin to calculate or even guess on what candidate Trump would say or do, so I'm going to pass on that one. But I can say that with these gentlemen's guidance, Secretary Clinton, I mean, her record is clear on her support to Israel. She certainly is nuanced and articulate about it. My only one concern is that you can't separate QME from the Iranian situation, and that's what we keep doing. We keep throwing money at it, making ourselves feel better, and that's ultimately counterproductive, and the only thing it does is make us feel better, and there are other tertiary and other consequences I think I mentioned. The gentlemen are exactly right. The FMF support does come back to American industry, but what is negotiating to be right now, in fact, is also some things to stay in Israel to supplement the ever-growing, ever-competitive Israeli defense industry. And my only concern to that is that we need to be clear-eyed about it, and that we also need to be clear-eyed about the fact that our ability to help protect the military edge only lasts as long as we have the edge to give Israel. And right now, that edge worldwide is getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller as the Chinese, the Europeans, and other catch up, number one. So if we don't have the edge, or the edge is only small enough that we really don't represent a significant ability to protect Israel's edge, then we're getting ourselves in trouble if there are other people who are willing to sell it, number one. Number two, if everybody else feels free to buy something that's almost as good, that greatly diminishes Israel's qualitative military edge because we won't be their salesmen, then ultimately at the end of the day, I'm not sure we do much for Israel, and it could be counterproductive. And I think a more holistic approach to QME, to weapon sales, and to throwing money at this needs to be done. And I know these guys are thoughtful guys, and Andrew pointed it out, and that's where State Department is supposedly to bring this all together. So I'm much more confident with Secretary Clinton.
Just a quick note, just to follow up on a few things that we just heard. Number one, in talking about America's edge as a result of working with Israel, in addition to the investment in the United States, I think it's also important to note how joint technology is really helping the United States along the way, whether it's the development of Iron Dome and some of the missile systems, which has been a joint project with the Israeli military industry, or the Trophy system, or cyber. I think we continue to see that these investments have paid off. I do think that there needs to be some good math done here, but I don't think that you can discount all of the benefits that come with this alliance. I think a lot of those things are overlooked. On Mary Beth's point about the Iran deal, I think that's absolutely correct, that the Iran deal continues to overshadow QME. And it really, I think, it casts a long and dark shadow. I think the idea that the Obama administration has been terrific on QME, I think you can say that technically that's probably the case. But the impact of the Iran deal has thrown our math out of whack when we talk about trying to figure out what the threats will be 5, 10, 15 years down the line. It's virtually impossible to tell. Now, some of that has to do with the upheaval from the Arab Spring, but so much of it has to do with the strengthening of Hezbollah, with the strengthening of other Iranian proxies, with the chaos, with borders that are breaking down because of IRGC involvement around the rest of the Middle East. And so, getting back to your original question, when you look at the presidential candidates, I think a lot of what we should be looking at is not just are they committed to QME, but how are they committed to ensuring that Iran will not engage in this malign behavior? How are they committed to ensuring that the IRGC does not become this force that destabilizes the region as it has over the last several years? I think that this administration has really not done enough, that the JCPOA was designed to isolate the nuclear behavior, right, only, and has really completely ignored the ballistic missile activity, has ignored the IRGC and terrorist activity, the terror funding. These are things that you cannot separate out from QME, and when you look at that process moving forward, that's what I would ask the next president about.
All right, we're going to turn to the audience for questions right now.
A couple of people alluded, Shoshana Bryan, Jewish Policy Center, alluded to the fact that we're separating the Iran deal from QME, from the Gulf states. We've also separated the U.S. defense budget from all of those things, and you pointed to that. We have decimated our defense budget, partly in the previous administration fighting wars, partly in this administration through sequestration. If we don't put the defense budget back where it is, all of the rest of the conversation is not moot, but it starts to turn on its own axis. We need the sales to the Gulf states because we need the money, and then we have to compensate Israel by giving them money so that they can buy stuff. But if we don't separate out and deal with the problem of U.S. defense budget by itself, all the rest of the stuff doesn't matter.
Respond to that? Sorry. I know this sounds esoteric, but it's important to understand, and Shoshana's exactly right. You know, to get Israel where it is, particularly in the last decades, the provision of advanced U.S. weaponry, where there was a significant technological advantage, was critical. We now are in the position where, as I think Derek, you may have said, or somebody said, we have Boeing, who may be out of the jet fighter business because it can no longer sell the F-15s. Why? Because the Southeast Asian market is limited, and the market where there are buyers is in the Middle East, and Israel has objected to Qatar and others. The same thing, no one wants to talk about it, is happening with Joint Strike Fighter. Here's an extremely troubled, some would say, I would argue no more troubled than any other program at this stage in its development. But here's a program that needs to have a second tier of buyer. The coalition members of the consortia will only be able to build this many. And in order for that program to be maintained sustainable, there's going to have to be more buyers. So they don't have to be exactly the same plane. We've always had different export versions of different things. And these are just two examples. Someone's going to have to buy those. There are competitive equipment being sold or being contemplated by Russians, by French, the Eurofighter. We've got the Swedes, who we went back and forth on a number of other things. There are competitors. There is, not that in the very distant future, a point in which American defense industry, for good or for ill, some people can argue that they backed themselves into this by overemphasizing advanced weaponry that required bulk sales in order to make it affordable for our guys. By the way, one of the reasons why we have to export these things is, in a lot of cases, the economies of scale is the only way we can afford it for our own troops, our Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines today. We have to have other buyers in order to reduce the cost of production. We are getting very quickly to the point in which we are not going to be able to do that. And we will be out of the advanced equipment business if we can't figure out a way. Number one, a lot of this is industry problems to develop, for example, an exportable business version from the get-go. rather than trying to fix a very advanced thing and dumb it down. But it is a very important question, and Shoshana is exactly right. This has to be linked with QME, the budget, our budget, the Israeli budget. How much sense does it make with us increasing the Israeli defense budget by X% while our budget is being decreased by X%? I think it's not an Israel question, it's a US question. I just think a little bit more thought on this is required at this age and at this stage of the game.
I just want to second that, and I think every single Secretary of Defense who served under President Obama would agree with your statement. Whether we go back and look at the way the budget was distorted by the Iraq War, but then also, of course, sequestration, which was a disaster. I think the good news is, taking into account Mary Beth's, the concerns that she's raised, is that Ash Carter fully understands this. I mean, this has been, for technology reporters like Marcus, Ash Carter has been a bonanza, right? I mean, he's made this one of his central goals as Secretary of Defense, the third offset. He's been to Silicon Valley 4 or 5 times, I think, in a year and a half as Secretary. And this is, so it's working, it's getting the Pentagon itself into fighting shape. It's working with industry and tapping into new areas of industry, parts of our overall industrial base that the Defense Department doesn't, for whatever reason, have particularly strong relations with, particularly in Silicon Valley. So I think it's regaining that edge is something that the current administration is working very hard towards. Now, something that I would very much hope would be continued the next administration. I would expect that with Secretary Clinton it would be continued in the next administration, but you're absolutely right to make that point that we do have to see this as part of a whole, not just as a particular piece of QME.
That's a good point.
Eli Lake from Bloomberg View. I wanted to follow up on a point that Mary Beth Long was making about Israel's defense exports. Is this something that was tracked in the government, and can you give us a sense of that? And also from the perspective of sensitive American technology that could be getting to countries we don't want it to get to. I know that was a problem 15 years ago, especially with China. Has that been, is that under control at this point? Is that still something that worries you?
We're playing catch up with the Israelis on India. They've really penetrated that market, and we are trying to build that type of relationship. And a lot of those systems we're trying to market, the Israelis are already there. For example, UAVs. And so I wouldn't say we're trying to prevent the Israelis from selling to India. We're trying to compete with them. There was, during the Bush administration, and Mary Beth can speak more, concerns about Israeli sales to China that came up. In the Obama administration, that was not an issue. And indeed, they were very sensitive to concerns about who they were selling to, because they did not want to run afoul of our foreign policy concerns. And that was often a topic of consultation and conversation when I had those conversations. So in my experience, and Derek can talk about his experience, that was not an issue that we were concerned about.
I agree.
Well, I just got one on Twitter that was.
Gentleman over there raising his hand as well.
Okay, so I just got one on Twitter. It's a program focus, but it says should the U.S. sell Israel or give Israel the massive ordnance penetrator, the 20,000+ pound bunker buster that the U.S. has developed specifically for to hit Iranian nuclear sites. Does anyone want to tackle that one?
I don't think they're asking.
I think they've given up asking. At least publicly.
Yeah.
Charles Perkins, APAC. I guess I wanted to follow up on maybe the point that Jonathan made, that I think if you look at the Israeli defense industry, certainly there are situations where they've emerged as a competitor to us in third markets. But I think on balance, if you looked at it, there's more synergies. There's more situations where there's cooperation, whether it is an Israeli innovative technology that we're producing over here because then we don't have to invest in the R&D to do it ourselves, and it's made by a U.S. producer, or vice versa, that the Israelis are producing something for their use here using FMF rather than giving it to Israeli industries. My general question, and again, you can answer it any way you want, is if you take it as a given that it's U.S. policy to maintain and uphold Israel's QME, and then if you take from that I'd like to say there's three legs in the stool of the QME. There's what we provide them, what we don't provide the other guys, and what the Israelis make themselves, because they are the ones that are best able to decide and innovate and produce the kinds of unique technologies, some of which are integrated into our systems, for their own defense. So to what extent do we have to take that element of the QME into consideration when working out a new MOU or when trying to, as a general principle, decide how to uphold the QME? And again, I take Mary Beth's point that there's issues of economies of scale that we have to export because our market isn't big enough. The same is true for the Israelis. They export 75% of their production, and again, because the IDF market isn't big enough. Again, where does the Israeli domestic industrial component come in as an intersection with the QME? And then just a shout out to the website, which I've been using for a couple of years. Patrick's done a terrific job. It's really a valuable resource.
Who wants to tackle that?
I guess for me, I'm advocating that it needs to play a larger role, in part because of the changing budgetary influences on both, the changing economies, and the changing nature of the U.S. defense export market. I'm not sure that we consider the extent to which and the appropriateness of U.S. taxpayer money subsidizing the Israeli industrial defense complex. Not saying that it shouldn't be done when we weigh it against where we are with our domestic defense budget and similar problems with our domestic industrial defense complex, number one. Number two, in my experience, and my experience is dated, and I certainly didn't have the global and the more broad insight and responsibilities that Secretary Shapiro had. But in my experience, it was not considered, not in a meaningful way, number one. Number two, what also was not considered in a meaningful way, I didn't think, was a calculation of what we were getting back. For example, I was very unpopular for saying no to supplementing on Iron Dome, as most of you will know, because at the time, the effort didn't reach the threshold requirement to get it out of R&D. It was only arguably making 7 to 13% of its hits. And when I asked for a prioritization of the billion that we were giving them, and Iron Dome was not on it, my question was, as we rack and stack with 2 global wars going on with boots on the ground, I have to prioritize my budget. Where is the Israeli prioritization of its budget in order to tell me where Iron Dome falls before you come in and tell me it's your highest priority and you want the American taxpayer? Now, not a popular view, perhaps even an inappropriate view, but it is an important consideration going forward, I believe, and one that the State Department, I think, is best qualified to make.
Can I just, I'll be curious to see what Andrew thinks, because we may be exposing here a bureaucratic scene, because in my experience doing the job Mary Beth did at the Defense Department, that issue was not part of the QME discussions that we were having with our Israeli counterparts.
I mean, Israel is unique in that most countries that receive FMF have to use it on U.S. defense articles and services, and Israel has a carve-out that they can use a portion on their own, and that's, I think, one of the things that's being discussed in this next round of negotiation. So they already are treated, above all our other partners and allies in that respect. The argument that we get benefits from that, sure. I mean, there are Israeli technologies that have benefited U.S. troops in today, but the point Mary Beth's making is in today's tough environment of tight defense budgets, do we need to rethink that? I think that's probably one of the things the administration is talking about with the Israelis now. It did not come up during my tenure because the negotiations hadn't started on the new MOU yet. And so, just on Iron Dome, what the Obama administration decided to support it once the U.S. military was able to validate that the thing really worked. And then we decided to move forward with, supporting it. And there are people who went to Israel to evaluate and really they were expecting, because they had Mary Beth's experience of not a great hit, they were expecting to be disappointed, and they actually, remember, they came back and said, wow, this thing, we're really surprised at how well it works. And with that, the decision was then made to provide the funding to buy additional Iron Dome batteries.
Any more questions?
Ovid Zucker. The elephant in the room is nuclear Iran. In other words, what is Israel's ability to neutralize or to defend against a nuclear Iran? All the rest is nibbling at the edges with all those considerations. If Israel is unable to do that, then everything else is irrelevant. And this is a new reality that was created by the Obama administration that didn't exist before. This is a whole new level. We talk about bunker buster bombs and so on. These are also at the edges. Facing this reality is a U.S. Job just as much as the entire Middle East has to face a situation, and it has been created in the last few years by this deal. And this is what we have to talk about countering and neutralizing and get a QME on. And it is not a minor problem, it is a major problem. If we don't do this, we haven't done anything.
I didn't quite hear a question in there, but
I mean,
anyone
look,
wants
I
to
just think,
respond?
let's take yourself back to 2009, right? And what the Obama administration inherited when it came to the challenge of a nuclear Iran. Iran had gone from a couple hundred centrifuges in the early 2000s to over 5,000, I think, at the end of the 2000s. That wasn't under President Obama's watch. The United States, when it came to dealing with the Iran nuclear problem, was isolated in the world. Most of the world thought that it was the United States was the problem in dealing with a nuclear Iran because it was not willing to engage the Iranians in meaningful discussions. It was not willing to engage in any kind of negotiation. And therefore, we were out of position. We were out of position diplomatically. We were out of position in terms of trying to bring other countries by our side in terms of sanctions. We were out of position militarily. When Secretary Gates got into the Pentagon in late 2007, 2008, 2009, he found our planning wasn't in place, capabilities weren't in place. Now, there was good reason because we were in the middle of a big war in Iraq. And so what the Obama administration started, I know this has been rehearsed a million times in front of groups like this, was a process to change the dynamic regarding Iran and to get in a place where it was the world united against an Iran in terms of its nuclear ambitions. And we could be in a place where we could, for at least 15 years, put Iran's nuclear ambitions in the box, right? And so far, that's working, okay? Now, I agree with the point I think several folks have made that it's all about the implementation. And so the Iran deal is a fact. And so the question before us is, who's going to be better placed and better equipped to implement that deal moving forward, to ensure we hold Iran's feet to the fire in terms of any violations, to deal with the issues that had nothing to do with the Iran nuclear deal, like missiles, support for extremists in the region, its proliferation of conventional capability in the region, all huge concerns of this administration that was not addressed in the JCPOA, nor was it intended to be. That was a different issue. So now that we've got the nuclear issue somewhat on ice for a while, we can concentrate on these issues before us. I think it provides more space to do that. But we're not going to go back, I don't think, to the status quo ante. We're going to have the world with the United States against Iran if we are seen as the party that does not want this deal to work. And that's what I'm most worried about.
A quick response to that. Look, first of all, and again, not to go back and relitigate the deal, because not only have all of us done this in front of other similar groups, but we've all done it right here in many cases.
I'm sure you will for years to come.
Yeah, I unfortunately probably sooner than we think. But look, I think, first of all, in terms of America's isolation, in terms of holding the line on sanctions, we may have been among the few that wanted to continue sanctions and pressure, or at least some of us. But we had the luxury of being able to do it. That as the purveyor of the dollar, as the leader of the formal financial sector, we could have continued this for as long as we wanted to. And I think that's lost on a lot of people. And so now what we have is literally a ticking time bomb, that within 15 years we're going to have to deal with the ramifications. The thing that I often think goes overlooked or just not talked about in this broader discussion of QME and Iran is what was Israel not allowed to do in the run-up to this deal. When the Israelis were talking in 2011, 2012, 2013 even about taking action, we heard about the quiet spats, and not even the not so quiet spats between the administration and the Israelis on what they wanted to do and what they were told explicitly that they could not if they wanted to maintain the support of the United States. And I'm assuming that QME and all the other support that we discussed was part of that equation for the Israelis, that they knew that if they took action, in what they thought was a vital Israeli interest, a defense interest, that they would lose this pillar of support that they've long leaned on. I can tell you that just speaking to one senior Israeli official years ago, that there was some request for what was called a shopping list. I don't know what was on it, but it was done quietly. It was done in a way that was not public, and it was turned down. And on that shopping list, there was apparently weapons or other systems that would have enabled Israel to get rid of this nuclear program. I don't know for how long. I don't know what the impact might have been. And it's tough to go back and do the counterfactuals, but I think when you take a look at this broader question of QME and the impact of Iran and the elephant in the room of what happens 15 years later, it would be very interesting one day to go back and look at what was on the table and what the Israelis were specifically and explicitly forbidden to do.
Derek, with all due respect, there's almost nothing that you said that I agree with.
Good, good.
Particularly the characterizations, but on that point, looking forward, and we touched upon it today, but I think it's critical that we all think about it. Regardless of how we got here, this president and this administration today has left Israel in the position of a ticking time bomb, I think is a ticking something that arguably will allow a transparent assessment of the Iranian nuclear program. I think that's really an optimistic view. I think that most people would say that the likelihood of it being transparent and us having full knowledge is slim to none, but we can all be hopeful. The issue is we've got a missile program that's moving quickly apace, that is integral to this capability, whether or not it has a nuclear weapon on it. And you've got a weapons of mass destruction and a destruction capability next door to Israel that is advancing at a rapidity, at a breadth, and a lethality that is heretofore unknown. Same with the Quds Force and all the other equally lethal capabilities that could be and are in many ways directed at Iran and its proxies, number one. While I don't think anybody would make the argument that Iran today, either through lack of the shopping list or just life, has any ability to counter this lethality, whether nuclear or otherwise, from Iran. And that's a situation that exists today, and that's a situation, as far as I know, which will likely exist in the 5 years and the 15 years. In parallel to that, this is the piece that everybody forgets, all this QME is designed to protect Israel from its possible regional and worldwide enemies who can operate against it, not just Iran, But a lot of the weapons sales discussion talks about other Arab and regional partners for whom they have concerns. These are the very same actors who were looking and saying, here is a Persian nuclear weapon. I am also afraid of this. I need to build up my defenses, maybe even develop a nuclear capability so that I'm not attacked by Iran. Iran right now is very busy against Iraq and other places. So you have a proliferation of capability in those countries that is now escalating at a rapid rate. So not only have you increased Israel's vulnerability to Iran, but arguably to everybody else who's arming up, worried about Iran as well. So the idea that Israel is going to be in a better position at any point in time going forward against Iran or its either perceived or maybe even mistaken, its regional allies, is just not very realistic. And we've done very little, QME or otherwise, to address that. And I hope that the next president, certainly Secretary Clinton and Mr. Trump, have lots of very smart people around them who would hopefully advise them to do the same. But this is something that we need to take a look at, regardless of how we got here.
This is a subject I assume we could debate all day, but we are out of time today. So please join me in thanking our panel.